It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that always buys condoms in bulk. Joining me, of course, is Bianca.
Hello, everybody.
And rejoining us, our founder, your favorite, Dr. Darrel Ray.
Woo.
Thanks so much for being here tonight. And
here.
Yeah, thank you. And tonight we'll be answering that age-old question, who wants to buy a cow when you can just have sex for free? We're going to be tackling issues of how much sex is too much and whether or not sluts really do it better. So please join us, jump into the conversation, join the YouTube chat, jump on our Discord, or if you're really brave, go ahead and give us a call right here on the air. We'll be at 512-686-0279. That number again is 512-686-0279. With that, Darrel, you brought up for this episode the concept of sociosexual orientation. And I have to admit, as somebody who does this every week, I had no idea what you were talking about until I, did a quick Google and sorted all of that out. So for those of us who are not currently performing sexuality research or writing a book, can you tell us what this construct actually looks at?
Well, it's a very interesting construct that goes back to 1990 when a couple of social psychologists noticed a wide range of behavior in people and around their sexuality and decided, well, let's figure out what's at the bottom of this. And they started what has become a massive investigation over the last 30 years literally 30 years since 1990 on what drives our sexual behavior. And there's so much to it. It's like opening a Pandora's box. We're going to have an encyclopedia's worth of research here. You can actually do several doctoral dissertations on what we're going to talk about here tonight. But I was interested in introducing the audience to it because we're all familiar with like the Kinsey scale, and we're familiar with the idea of a spectrum of sex different kinds of spectrums with respect to sex and sexuality. But what they propose here is that there's something there, the authors of this original study and then a revised study that came around in 2008, I think the revised study came in, talks about a concept called restricted and unrestricted. And when you understand what this means, it may explain some of your own behavior and why the way you do and why you behave. It may also explain why you can't understand your brother or your parents or your best friend and how they behave so much different than you do sexually. So let me just introduce the notion of restricted and unrestricted. Sure. Because that's kind of the key component to understanding everything. And there's a lot more than we'll talk about here tonight. A restricted person is much more likely to want to be exclusive, or as some people like to call it, monogamous. I don't like to call it that, but okay. And likes to have one partner, tends to be much more involved in and be much more romantic, tends to marry, figuratively speaking, marry sex and love much more tightly, that the two should go together. And that's what's called a restricted sociosexual orientation.
And when we're talking about restricted and, these different desires, are we talking about love and romance and affection, or is this just strictly talking about lust or sexuality or whatever construct we want to supply there?
Well, okay. I think the very first ones you mentioned there, love and affection, that is much more important to the restricted sociosexual orientation. Move to the other side, and you can actually take a test online with all this, and it's a 9-point test. If you score a 1 or a 2, you're the kind of person that's probably going to get married and stay married for life. On the other side, somebody scores high on social orientation is unrestricted. Love and sex don't go together for them, or not nearly as important. Commitment for life, not nearly as important. And so you get a different approach to sex and sexuality in someone who's unrestricted in their sexual orientation. Now, we need to be careful because our culture puts values and judgments on these all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say it. I don't give a shit which way you go on this spectrum, because as we're going to learn out later, there's probably a whole lot of genetics involved. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about the genetics. There is really interesting genetic research that shows you're probably born with a tendency towards one or the other. The best way to understand that is to think about, are you introverted or are you extroverted? And there are lots of people that are introverted, and there's lots of people that are extroverted, but many people are in the middle. It's a spectrum. So I'm an ambivert. I'm somewhere in the middle. Some people would say I'm a pervert, but no, it's ambivert.
Yeah, so this is a lot like what we talked about with Frank last week when we were discussing the monogamice and this idea that there may be some genetic or hormonal component to our willingness to have sex, I guess, outside of committing and loving relationships.
Right. And there's interesting sex differences here. Of course, as you might suspect, men tend to be more score higher on social sexual orientation,
and be less restricted or more unrestricted, however we want to frame that.
Right, they're more unrestricted than women. However, we got to remember this: culture has something to do with this. Mm-hmm. And there's been a wide range of research across cultures. I think. I didn't get online and look at the latest research on this one, but I think 42 or 43 different cultures have been tested.
I saw, I think, either 42 or 47 in one study doing an analysis.
It's enormous. And like they tested like 25,000 people in these different cultures. And what they found was no matter what culture, men tend to score the same with a slight, a variance towards the unrestricted. However, women change quite a bit based upon what culture they're in. And you can imagine why, because culture has a lot to say about women's sexuality. Mm-hmm. So you go to Saudi Arabia and test women in Saudi Arabia, they're going to test much more restricted, because in that culture, you get your head cut off if you don't. Whereas if you go to Sweden, if you go to Denmark, if you go to Northern Europe, women test much closer to men than they do anywhere else. And if you can think of a bell curve, there's a bell curve of men, and it's a little bit over to, say, this direction, the right, or the left in your screen. Women have a bell curve too, and it overlaps the men's. But the more sexually liberated women are, the more sexually free women are, the more their curve moves over to where the men's is. It never completely overlaps. Women never become as sexually unrestricted as men do, no matter what the culture. But they do have a tendency to move that direction. So it tells us something we've known from other research, and that is women are much more sexually flexible than men are. And no matter what culture, men don't seem to respond to the culture, whereas women do tend to respond to the culture here.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that that's always, of course, by degrees. But it does beg the question, are you comfortable with suggesting that in some, futuristic, utopian, progressive society that didn't have all of these pressures and mores, that there might be maybe a total overlap between the two distributions?
No, I'm not comfortable saying that.
Yeah.
I would say, I think there's more evidence of a genetic component, which we haven't spoken about yet. There's evidence that women tend to just, probably as a result of some evolutionary components in our genetics, women tend to be more restricted than men. And I don't have any problems with that. I think that's probably part of our evolutionary heritage. But what we're seeing, I think, in the research over this particular concept is that women are not nearly as restricted as Christianity, for example, would lead you to believe.
Mm.
Once women are given an opportunity to express themselves in the way they want to express themselves without the fear of death or shame or any of that other shit, they tend to express themselves more openly and more freely.
I noticed that it also, which was refreshing, talked about bisexual people as well in this study. So it said that of the category of women as a gender, bisexual women were significantly less restricted in their sociosexual attitudes and behaviors than both lesbians and heterosexual women.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Kind of.
Very much so.
An old girlfriend of mine used to say that, this was like 20 years ago. She used to say, well, being bisexual just means you get, twice the opportunity to get lucky on Saturday night.
It's just greedy, is what it is.
Hey, I just like more people than you do.
She was cool. We really enjoyed each other.
Well, it feels like the more maybe modern conceptualization of this is when you'll see on dating profiles and things, people identifying as demisexual, desiring some type of commitment or emotional connection before being willing to enter into sexuality. Is that the same thing that we're talking about here, maybe from just the inverse direction?
Well, anytime you talk about this kind of human behavior stuff, it's multi-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
We're really just talking about two dimensions, restricted, unrestricted.
Sure.
And I think you can add other things in there. We'll actually come back and talk about some other things later, but you can add, and remember, when people use the terms like the terms demisexual or some of the other terms that are coming out, these aren't rooted in any academic, or they're not necessarily rooted in academic research.
Sure.
They're a popularization of how people feel. Now, maybe it'll come out in academic research sometime. I imagine that it will someday, but we have to be careful about what is a peer-reviewed academic approach to understanding versus what's a popular approach to understanding. And they can both be valid. I don't have any trouble with the word demisexual, but I'm not sure what we're seeing in the sociosexual orientation completely overlaps with what people are calling demisexual.
I think that makes a lot of sense because I took this test and I scored, I think, an 8 out of 9, which was surprising. But also, I would consider myself demisexual in the popular term. So that was an interesting dynamic for me to kind of wrestle with and be like, okay, well, I scored pretty high on this thing, which means I'm fairly unrestricted. And everything I tested for is accurate to my experience, but I still would prefer to have that emotional kind of romantic connection with a partner before getting involved physically. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic there.
Well, and it just brings up all of these very interesting questions about self-identification. How to even do that in a society that has just cluttered our minds with so much junk. I mean, I can only hypothesize, knowing that sexuality is fluid, that I've been queer my entire life, but it wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I felt comfortable actually opening up or exploring those ideas. And so it's very interesting to ask yourself, if you take a test, how seriously do you need to take the results, or how do you compare those versus maybe your lived-in experiences, or just what resonates with you when you're reading about these different labels and descriptors?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's quite a few other variables that come into this, because the research shows that, for example, people who score of the five personality, the big 5, we call them in psychology. Mm-hmm. Openness to new experience and curiosity also correlate with unrestricted sexuality.
Mm.
Those two kind of goes together, because if I'm curious and open to new experience, I'm probably going to be more sexually adventurous. On the other side, if you've got somebody who scores low on openness to new experience, they don't want new experiences. They're not curious. It doesn't mean they're not intelligent. No, curious does not mean unintelligent. It just means they're not going out there and jumping out of airplanes. So people who are who are unrestricted they're the ones jumping out of airplanes or taking risks. And to the restricted people and the less curious kind of people, that looks crazy. I mean, personally, I don't jump out of airplanes, even with a parachute. But I do climb mountains, and I know some people think I'm an idiot for doing that. And if you look at my life, I mean, just using Darrel Ray's history here, I have always been adventurous. I mean, I'm not on the cutting edge. I'm not on the bleeding edge, but I'm generally on the cutting edge. And I do have the common sense to be safe about it because I've managed to live this long. So you can see that people really, I mean, just using my own example, I score high. I score almost as high as you do, V. And I'm pretty damn high. If I'd have taken this test 20 years ago, I'd probably score even higher. I don't know. You know, testosterone goes down as you get older.
Interesting. Do you see that as having a connection, the chemical balance in people being correlated?
It is absolutely correlated. There's been some really interesting research that's taken place about, I think the big piece of research took place in 2009 to about 2011. They actually did swabs to find, you know, what the testosterone level.
All right.
Oh.
May take a moment to get Darrel back on the line, as we seem to be having some tech issues.
You know what? The internet has been weird and cranky all day.
Yeah, well, because everybody's watching Star Trek right now.
You know what? That's
what it is. Everything's shutting down.
I'm not mad anymore. if we're going to be upset about something,
that would be it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, we will work on getting Darrel back on the line and figure out where the complication is there. We've got a number of more questions for him, but in the meantime, we'd love to take your calls. And actually, we've got an email I'd like to jump into.
Yeah,
here.
let's do that.
Okay. So the email just says simply, I gave my fiance a pass last night, girlfriend. I'm the guy in a cis hetero couple otherwise. I know who the person will be if other conditions work out, and I'm fairly comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. My question is, what steps do we need to take to keep this from going badly, as it often does for people who go in without being careful, and what resources should we look into?
That's a good question. Excuse me. I think it's always going to be a little bit harder to open up a previously monogamous relationship than to enter into a poly relationship with everybody understanding those are the terms off the bat.
Very much so.
It's going to probably take a little bit of extra flexibility and extra patience and extra time. But I think that if everybody's on the same page, it should be not a terrible thing. It should be able to work well.
Yeah, and you hit on the important thing there, I think, which is everybody on the same page?
Yeah.
Which is the thing to really highlight. It's been said here, it's been said a million different places that poly folks maybe self-select, maybe develop, but tend to have an incredible ability to communicate with one another. And that's really vital to making anything like this work.
Yeah. Also, the understanding that things like things we would label negative emotions in many monogamous relationships, like if you get jealous, you're the crazy bitch.
Sure.
Or like if you're anxious, then you're insecure and clingy. These are things that are talked about in a different way, or should be in a poly relationship. They're emotions and their feelings that are also valid and should be expressed and are not or should not be judged. Mm-hmm. So if at any point, if your fiancé or you or this other person are feeling any of these emotions, come out and say that and say, hey, this thing made me feel kind of insecure. Can you give me some affirmations? Can you tell me what I need to hear in this moment to make myself feel better? So really asking for what you need is going to be crucial.
Yeah, we've said it here before, but I think it's important to remember that the only thing you need to be responsible for are your actions here. The things that you say, I mean, that's certainly a form of acting, but your emotions, your experiences, your thoughts, your feelings, those are yours. You don't need to apologize for those. Now, you ask about resources. I would definitely encourage you to make sure you're doing everything you can to be communicating well with one another. And so that may include something like the radar template that we've referenced here a number of times, put out by the Multi-Amory podcast. something like the Multi-Amory podcast, or just having access to a open or a community, and those sorts of things can be really encouraging, even if this feels like a somewhat narrow part of y'all's relationship, and maybe you're not both going out and wanting to like buy a giant mansion with 50 rooms and just stock it with all the people you're in love with, to take it seriously and not let it sort of sneak up on you. So just in asking for resources, I would say all of that, and then maybe throw out Opening Up by Tristan Taormino. There are a number of great books about polyamory, The Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory, The Ethical Slut, More Than Two, all of these sorts of things. But Opening Up feels like one that might be particular to y'all, and that I'd encourage you to take a look at.
Yeah, I think what you said was spot on, making sure that you are surrounding yourself with people who are going to support you and who understand where you're coming from, either from personal experience or because that they are allies in that way. I know one of the most pressuring and difficult parts of becoming poly myself and entering into that kind of relationship was knowing there are going to be people here who think that I'm just being really dumb. And
Sure.
people who think they're going to judge me and be like, oh, you chump, you know? So being sure that like you're taking that with a grain of salt if you come across that people are conditioned to think about relationships in a certain way. And if you deviate from that, you're going to get some pushback. But making sure that you're surrounding yourself with people or podcasts or YouTube series that support that and celebrate it.
Okay, well, Darrel, it feels like we've got you back on the line. You hearing us all right?
I'm hearing you great. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but we're back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, fair enough. I guess just to get back into it, you had kind of mentioned maybe some gender differences in the study, as well as V brought up bisexuality. But what else can you tell us about just sort of general cliff notes or sort of the color of things as the research has gotten underway these past 30 years?
Well, one of the things I think we're just about to get into before I lost contact was the testosterone piece.
Yes.
And what they found was, as V mentioned, the more unrestricted seem to be women, bisexual women, even and lesbian women and monogamous women were less. And in all three of these cases, the testosterone followed that pattern.
I do want to make sure that we do jump on that real quick. Heterosexual, I think, instead of monogamous, correct? Because there can be monogamous, bisexual, and lesbian women.
Yeah, I missed that. Thank you.
Just jumping on that in case.
So, thank you. Yeah. So anyway, the testosterone followed that pattern, and it followed the pattern in males as well, but not exactly the same. Single people, whether male or female, had higher levels of testosterone. But once they got into I'm getting a real bad echo here. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was struggling to hear you.
Should we do something about it, or I keep talking?
Yeah, you're cutting out pretty bad.
Yeah, it seems like you're cutting out pretty bad. Let me give you a moment to maybe touch base with the guys in the booth and see if we can get that hammered out, and we'll kind of jump in from here.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is interesting to consider that there might be some connection between, hormone levels and even singleness, let alone sexual orientation or these different things. I have people come into my office on a really regular basis, basically just hung up on the question of, am I gay? Am I allowed to say that I'm gay? I mean, how many emails or phone calls have you and I gotten that basically boiled down to, why can't I take a blood test and find out that I'm, 30% straight or 70% gay or whatever it might be? And I don't know necessarily that we would ever get to that point, because I think that people are so complex and multifactorial. However, it is interesting to consider the possibility of, further research and being able to maybe understand these things about ourselves in a more definitive sort of way.
I think the more we find out, and it seems to be the trend from what I've been researching and from what I've learned on this show, is the more we learn, the more we realize it's not us. Like, it's not our choice necessarily.
Sure.
It's not something we decided. It always seems to come down to biology, to the brain chemistry, to the neural pathways we've developed as a result of our environment. So I think it's going to be a very interesting to see how many of these studies do we need to have out there and accessible before we start thinking about these things in a different way, a way that kind of distinguishes it from the idea of libertarian free will, and I chose this, and I made myself who I am today. Not that those are necessarily bad things to think about, but I don't know. I think that understanding that we are different inherently is going to make us appreciate our similarities even more.
Yeah, and it highlights for me why going to a Christian school, we had like an outside group that we paid to come in to interrupt classes for 2 days because, math, geometry, I've never used those in my real life. The thing that really mattered was that we have the right Christian worldview. So we spent 2 days going to Worldview Academy, which is this national organization.
Terrible.
Yeah, it was rough. And they really hit on the idea that Christians needed to be able to debunk the theory of evolution because of how singularly important that cultural argument was. This idea that if man is not created by God and has this complex, convoluted, amoral genetic heritage, that suddenly all of Christianity would start to fall apart. And, as evolution has become more widely accepted, if not actually taught in our schools, I maybe start to see some of that.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. The idea that we are, whether or not we ourselves identify as Christian, this is a predominantly Christian society, and the idea that there is a reason that we were created in a certain way, and that we have a purpose to fulfill, does fly very directly in the face with, no, it's just you've got higher testosterone.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yeah,
Yes.
seems to be good.
Okay, I don't hear any echo now. So
Perfect.
Can I go back to where I started? Or
Yeah, no, please walk us through this a little bit. We've just been kind of considering, I guess, the implications of what it would even mean to be able to have sort of a more biological understanding of who we are as individuals.
Well, I think, as I heard V say just a minute ago, as I came back in, the more biology we learn about this, the more it shows that there's a lot. I'm not going to say deterministic. I'm not going to say that, but I'm going to say we have, let's say there's a range of variability. I'm going to see my hands of human sexuality that's that wide, but you're born with this range of variability. One person is, and the next person's born with that range of variability. And we can start learning to respect that. And I heard you talking earlier about the email about the memory piece. What if I was born with with an unrestricted sexuality, but I was born into a Baptist or a very restricted church? Then it's going to create a whole plethora of problems for me, whether I'm male or female, because I'm going to be suppressed. And then I'm going to get married. And I'm probably going to marry somebody based on those assumptions that I never want a sex partner in my life. And I don't like to masturbate. I never look at pornography. Well, that ain't going to work too well after about 10 years.
Yeah, I wrote in the footnotes for last week's episode about how growing up, I really understood marriage equality to be this idea that people were free to do the same things. And what I mean by that is, like, myself as a male, I was legally allowed to marry a woman, and so was every male, therefore equality. And that was maybe all the thought I put into it at a young age. And I'm of course ashamed of that now, but I think that's an important part of this discussion to understand that when we're talking about equality, we're not talking about like the opportunity to do the same things. We're talking about living the life that actually lines up with and matches who we are. And as we're talking about societal oppression and maybe trying to get a better handle on who we are as individuals, whether genetically or otherwise, it's important to realize that we all have certain capacities and that we need a society that allows for everybody's capacity to be well expressed or well represented.
I agree. If I'll just plug my book here, Sex and God. Paid on chapter 20, I spend an entire chapter.
There you go.
You know how horrible their sexual training was. Kind of what you were referring to, Christy, in the 2 days you had to take off about worldview.
Yeah.
And so you get this horrible training about your sexuality that basically says you're worthless, you're horrible, your body's your biggest enemy. And if you have a high sex drive, or if you want to masturbate, or if you think someone of the same sex is attractive and you want to, mate with them instead of the opposite sex or whatever, that it's all your problem. That kind of thing can cause a lot of anxiety. It can cause sexual dysfunction. It can make for a very difficult development in relationships. How do I create a relationship with another human being if I don't even have a good relationship with myself? And I think that's the importance, not just of the notion of social sexual orientation. It's just one way to look at it. But I think you're on target, Christy, that we have to really become more comfortable with ourselves. We have to have a worldview that says equality isn't just within the confines of the Christian construct. It's within the confines of biology. Mm-hmm. And I think biology is very different. I want to move on to talk about the twin studies. There's been some really big twin studies in Australia and I believe in Sweden. And what they found was the twins, of course, take the sociosexual orientation. And as you might expect, their scores are very, very similar. And what they found was the scores of the sociosexual orientation predicted divorce. That the more unrestricted you were, the more likely you were to be divorced or get divorced. The less restricted, the more restricted you were, the less likely you were to get divorced. And the interesting thing was parental divorce was 0 in its predictability. The twins could have divorced parents, but if the twins were restricted in their sexuality, they themselves did not get divorced. Or the opposite. You could have parents that were totally dedicated and married for life, but have twins with highly unrestricted sexuality, and both of them would get divorced. What it tells us is parental influence is almost 0. And the more we know about this, and it goes into parenting, the more we know about the influence of parents is that, and people are going to get all upset and angry about what I'm about ready to say here, but go read my book, go read the research. It's common sense says we as parents have got a lot of influence over our kids. The fact is we have very little influence over our kids. There's a hell of a lot of biology, a ton of biology that has influence. And let me give you a great example that has nothing to do with sex. What if I'm a great baseball player, maybe a professional baseball player, and I want my child, my son, to be sexist about it, to be a great baseball player. And I raise him and I push him and I harass him and I want him to be in sports, but he wants to go play piano. He wants to be a concert pianist. I can harass him all day long. He will probably never become a good athlete, but he might become a concert pianist. I know parents who feel like they totally are disappointed in their child because their child did not become an athlete. They became a concert pianist. Now, to me, I love it. My kid's a concert pianist. Great. But, and I didn't say concert pianist. I said pianist.
I've been trying not to giggle this entire conversation. I'm not going to lie. I'm not above that. It's fine.
I thought you said this had nothing to do with sex.
Well, it again just comes right back to these notions of creating a world in which people are empowered to be the best versions of themselves, not the best version of the 7 available options or avatars.
Yeah, exactly. I want to do the flip side of what I just said. What if you are a great athlete and you want your kid to be a great athlete and they grow up to be, the Babe Ruth of baseball? The parent of that child is going to take credit for that and say,
sure,
it was my influence that made them a great baseball player. No, it probably wasn't. They had the genes to be an athlete. And if you got the genes and you've got the home environment, yeah, you're probably going to go that direction. So what we see as parents is parents always taking credit for their children's achievement and feeling disappointed with their kids when they don't go that direction. Add sex to that, and you'll see that, well, we stayed married for 50 years. Why can't you?
Mm-hmm.
They start to try to impose their social sexual orientation on a child who may have a totally different sociosexual orientation. And it's genetic. It has very little to do with parental training. You didn't fail your kid when they went out and had sex 10 times before they got married and only stayed married 10 years. That wasn't your failure. It's probably the biology going on there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, there's a lot of questions I really want to follow up on there, and I think it's such an interesting idea to imagine parenting as more about supporting and getting out of the way than anything else. But
Keep the kid alive long enough for the biology to
kick in, right? Which is such a different model, and it really asks an interesting question about our society at large and its role in, I guess, sort of getting out of the way and supporting rather than like shaping and demanding from us. But before we get into much more of that, I do want to go ahead and jump on the phones if we can. So I'm going to touch base real quickly with Sergio.
Hi, Sergio.
Hello. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys again.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks for
What can we do for you tonight?
I just wanted to give an update because last time I was kind of putting the toes in the water of being with somebody, and it didn't really work out. And in situations like this, you end up, either learning something or not. So I'm trying to learn something. Mm-hmm. And basically, I don't know if you guys remembered, but I was just feeling a lot for this person, and but at the same time, I had a lot of emotional issues that I was dealing with. And I was just like very upfront with him about everything, about how I was feeling, about my past. And I think I overwhelmed him. And what happened is he just decided we should be friends. And it's just really hard for me to deal with rejection after just complicated history, I guess. I don't know. And I found myself just thinking like, oh, well, what was I really in love with at the time, or what was I really enjoying at the time? Because if I hadn't known him for that long, it can't be exactly this person. So was I loving just being cared for? Was I loving just enjoying having somebody there in a way? But I know that it's not exactly that. And then when he kind of ended things or just said the possibility of a relationship wasn't available right now, I kind of blew up and I said, okay, well, if that's not possible, then we should just not be friends. I isolated myself. I started, just taking it out on me. Like it was my fault. Like what did I do wrong? But, he was stressing like, no, you just, like I need to focus on myself. And it seems like you need to focus on yourself as well. One of the things I remember you saying, Z, last time was, you don't believe that, that people are too broken to have a relationship or something. On the same token, I am hearing from a lot of my friends, and that a good advice is to just be stable within myself first. And I think that was honestly one of the biggest drawbacks of even just us having anything at all, is just I need to find a comfortable space of what does it look like to be cared for? How do I feel comfortable with that? How do I care for myself? Because the biggest thing with this relationship was it opened up an avenue for me to care about myself. And when somebody else when the condition for me caring about myself was somebody else, like, I think that scared him. And I think, I think he was just wise in saying, like, oh, that's not healthy. We shouldn't do this. So that seems to be about how, as much as I can summarize it.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to just start by saying, it sounds like this was a bit of a heartbreak. And I'm really sorry to hear that. I definitely want to acknowledge the struggles of what you're going through right now and, encourage appropriate amounts of like both ice cream and sad movies and, exercise and self-improvement in whatever ratio seems best to you. But I think that a little bit of both is called for in any good breakup or any good heartbreak.
Yeah. And I do want to stress a couple things. First, I think what I was trying to get across the other time we talked, Sergio, is that no one's too broken to not deserve a relationship, right? Nobody can say, you are broken, therefore you don't deserve this, or you can't go out and try to find this. I do think that there are people whose baggage is incompatible, right? And there are people who are not doing the same work at the same time. And it seems like that might be something that you guys had to deal with. You guys were both working on yourself and trying to figure out how to deal with that and also the other person, and maybe realizing that at this time that's not a thing that can happen. And I know that that's really hard, and I'm so sorry about that. I do think that it's good to approach it from a standpoint of what can I take away and what can I learn from this. I would caution you, though, that not to let that thought process move into the what did I do to make this happen thought process, because that's a very slippery slope and something that I know I've done many times.
It's easy to do that, too.
It is very easy to do that. So I think taking things as they come and realizing and gathering that data and applying it to your next relationship is a great and healthy way to go about it. I just want to make sure you know that this isn't like on you and how dare you, because that's not going to be helpful for anybody.
Yeah, you can certainly tailor your game based on what you've learned. But, I think I said last time we spoke, it's important not to put too much pressure or obligation on any particular relationship. If I can, maybe we can even tailor a lot of this conversation we've been having and acknowledge that this may not have anything to do with you or him or anything that like really has a value statement behind it so much as just chemistry and coincidence and timing. I think that there is a lot of worth in being able to say that he's a good guy, I'm a good guy, but we are just not good together or for each other right now. And to acknowledge that it's okay to move on from that and find somebody who is. I'm not going to say you're going to find somebody better because I don't think that we need to put a value statement on the person that you're dating. I am going to say that, important. Yeah, I hope that you're not agonizing over what did I do wrong? How could I have done it better? How do I do it better next time? And instead focus on just finding your person or a person who is good for you.
Another thing that I found is very interesting. I forget where I found this suggestion from and where this came from. So I apologize to whoever it was who told me. But they said, when you describe your relationship with somebody, what do you talk about? Do you talk about the things that they do for you and give you, or do you talk about the things that you appreciate about them and who they are? And for me, that was kind of a sit back moment, because you can do both, obviously. But if you're like, I love my partner because they make me feel safe and I like having someone to have regular sex with and all of these things that have to do with the relationship as opposed to the person, then yeah, I think what you said before about wondering, what about this did I love? What about this was I enjoying? That's something you can take to the next person and take and enjoy that with that person.
Fair to say.
I actually, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
What it got me to thinking about was, why did I feel like I needed him? Because that's really the point that I got to in such a fast time, was like, I felt like I need this person in my life for me to feel like a whole person. And then it got me to thinking, like, in what ways do people put themselves in these situations? And then today I was thinking about religion. You know, you can decide to believe that you need this imaginary friend and you can talk to him all the time. And I just kind of wanted an excuse to like throw myself into this person and need this person. Whether or not, you know, what my imagining of him was imaginary or whatever, like just being around him, I wanted to kind of feed this need. And it's just, it gets me thinking about like how I fall in love or why even I fall in love and the patterns in the past that I've, you know, fallen for people. And I've realized like, well, that was not good for me, or like, that was just not, a good headspace for me to be in with that person, especially. And, yeah, it just really got me thinking about my motivations, I guess. Yeah. And I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I'd like to really encourage you as you are, you know, looking ahead and wondering what next steps might be and wanting and craving some sort of romantic love or connection. You know, certainly I would say that there are a lot of great books out there, and there might be some value in kind of running some of these issues to ground and working with a therapist or something along those lines. But more than anything, what kind of stands out is just the need for mindfulness, to have a little bit of curiosity about somebody you might be dating, to have a little bit of intrigue about what that relationship could include that doesn't involve a need or a necessity or an obligation or a desperation, because that's one of the best ways to destroy a relationship before it can start.
I hear that.
I think you're spot on in terms of the way that you're thinking about this. It gives me a lot of hope for you, just to know that you are thinking about motivation and pattern and intention and why do I do this and what can I do differently. That's going to get you really far. Not a lot of people do that.
I'm glad you have a bright. Because I definitely, it feels like I'll never have a relationship, especially as a queer person. You know, it's like I don't know what that would look like. I don't feel like I deserve it after all this. You know, it's like people my age are getting married and having kids, and it's like, what do they have that I don't? Like, what? Why is it so hard? You know. So I mean, thank you. I'm glad. I think just stepping away from emotion is one of the biggest things I have to do to myself, because, you know, tying it back to the religion thing, we have these kind of beliefs that we feed. And one of my beliefs that I've held since my religious indoctrination growing up is like to suffer, or I deserve to put myself down or put myself in situations that aren't good for me, or, you know, it's like, or I don't deserve to be happy. You shouldn't be happy. You know, the blessed are the meek, or so I think just stepping away from emotions might be the healthiest thing for me right now.
Well, let me push back on that just ever so gently and say that your emotions are there for a reason. We did not evolve to have this incredibly complex social and emotional intelligence for no reason. And so I do think that your emotions are there for good reasons, and that they can do a lot for you. What you're maybe wanting to do is hold them a little bit more loosely, you know, not feel so tied down to those emotions, not feel so caught up in them, but instead to maintain a little bit of curiosity about them. You know, if you hear a bell dinging in the background that lets you know, hey, I'm anxious, hey, I'm lonely, you can listen to that warning bell and know that it means something without necessarily all of a sudden going into a panic and calling the fire department and let's freak out. You can have an emotion without necessarily changing your behavior. And so I would urge you not to step away from your emotions, but to maybe just handle them with a more open hand or a looser grip.
Heard. I'll be working with my therapist.
Glad to hear it. Best of luck to you.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you guys.
Absolutely.
Thank you for calling
Take
back.
care. Well, I guess I just want to take a moment and to acknowledge and apologize to everybody as we're kind of struggling with an internet outage and trying to get everything back on track. But for now, it seems like we're up and running. Darrel, you're hearing us okay?
I'm hearing you fine. Thank you.
Okay, great.
would throw in something on Sergio a little bit, just a couple things, and hopefully he's still listening. And that would be, consider the difference between want, desire, and need. He sounded, when you overemphasize the need, you kind of get desperate. That would be one little thing. And the other thing is, I think there's some interesting stuff to think about around attachment styles, and what is his particular attachment styles. And there's healthy attachment styles, and there's less healthy or more self-destructive attachment styles. So I think considering those, and might even work with his therapist on those ideas, if you did a little research and go in and talk about that. Anyway, that was my
absolutely. I appreciate you weighing in. So I wanted to, I guess, at this stage, getting back to talking about sociosexual orientation, can we say definitively that there is a healthy number or a healthy sociosexual orientation, or maybe even just a healthy range within that wider range?
No. Is there a level of extroversion? Is there a healthy level of introversion? No, it's just that's the way you are. So I think what we want to say is we're born with a tendency, with a propensity towards. I am not mechanical at all. I have 3 brothers who can repair a car with their eyes closed. Don't let me touch a car. That was, maybe touch it to start it or turn it off, but don't let me mess with the car's engine. Where did that come from? Well, it came from my dad. My dad is an amazing mechanic, and he did his best. He probably spent more time with me teaching me mechanics than he did any of my 3 brothers, and none of it took. So there's clearly a genetic component there to being a mechanic. And that's probably why I'm a good psychologist. I understand the mechanics of the human or the brain or the social relationships, but I don't understand the way my car works. And is there a healthy level of mechanical ability? No. That's ludicrous. People would say, well, no, not everybody needs to be a mechanic. It would help if I was a little more mechanical sometimes, but so I think if we look at it as there's propensities and it's like any other thing. I'm not very good at math. My daughter is amazing at math. She is a doctorate in pharmacology. She had to have math to do that.
Wow.
I would never make a pharmacologist like she is.
Nope.
So, but where'd she get that genetics? I don't know where she got the mathematical ability. So it didn't come from me. But we understand these things when I talk about extroversion and introversion. We understand when I talk about mechanical ability or not, or mathematical ability or not. And all we're saying here is we have propensities when it comes to our sexuality. And they're really not any different. And it's okay to have a high degree of curiosity and adventurousness about your sexuality. However, I will say this, and I think this is maybe where you were going a little bit, Christy. It's important to be ethical about that.
Sure.
I need to be open. I have a high degree of sexual adventurousness, and if I get involved with somebody who wants the opposite, then I need to be open and honest about it. We probably aren't going to get along too well. Because I want to have 3 sex partners, not 1. She or he wants to have 1 sex partner, not 3. And there's nothing wrong with either one of those. It's just incompatible. We are incompatible in that area. And I think there's other things, in relationships, you can be really incompatible in some areas. For example, finances. I don't know, but in my couples and marriage counseling, they tell us 3 things can go wrong: money, sex, and children. And you can be incompatible in those 3, but there's workarounds oftentimes. Money, you just keep your bank account separate, for example. That might be one option. Well, and there's workarounds in sex. Well, one person can be non-monogamous and the other one person might be monogamous. As long as they are ethical and open about it with each other, there's workarounds. If the two people are not willing to work on the workarounds, then it ain't gonna work. To use work a little bit too much.
Yeah, so I definitely hear that when folks are a little bit mismatched. What, if anything, would you say to somebody who is maybe coming into or realizing that they have a really high sociosexual orientation? Is there any value in maybe knowing that about yourself? And what sort of advice or strategies would you encourage somebody who's coming up on that awareness to, I guess, to use just as they're navigating the world?
Well, I think V said it earlier. Having two people with very different ones could be difficult, and especially if somebody's moving into something like polyamory. Mm-hmm. I think it's really difficult, as V mentioned, to open a marriage up once it's been closed around a religious notion like Christianity or Islam has around what marriage is and is not. Mm-hmm. But we get this all the time. I see it all the time. People coming into their 30s and realizing that they were oppressed by the religious ideology of their childhood, and they got married under that religious oppression, and now they're saying, I want to explore this new part of me, and they're looking at their partner and saying, I want to explore. I never got to explore when I was a teenager or when I was an early adult, and the marriage falling apart. You probably need to get a third party, a therapist, to help you move through that stage. But you need to get a therapist that's not going to judge you for expressing your sexuality or wanting to express your sexuality in ways that you were not allowed to when you were adolescent or early adulthood. And therefore, don't get a religious therapist, because they're going to send you back to monogamy and say, well, Jesus said to be monogamous, so you're not going to get anywhere there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Christy, I think your question is really the essence of how do we move into being who we are if we signed up for it, if the rules were very different when we signed up for the relationship. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's very easy. It's really difficult. And it's not going to work for everybody. If we had a formula to answer your question, you and I would not be in business anymore.
Yeah, fair to say.
There are definitely poly relationships, though, where one of the partners is monogamous and is okay with their partner being poly.
Yeah, well, and all of this conversation about polyamory, I think, fails to look at our sexuality just based on that, because you can be polyamorous and still be seeking a demisexual leaning type of orientation or type of relationship. You can be polyamorous in a, closed 5 ad or what have you, where there is a deep and meaningful, loving relationship among everybody involved. Or you can be completely single and not have had sex in weeks or months or years, but be willing and interested and desirous of a one-night stand or something much more casual. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to recognize that this is like one factor in somebody's personality or in somebody's sexual identity.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. Just one factor. And let's be open to all the other possible factors. And, sure. And each one of us has to figure this out for themselves. There's no formula, and no therapist is going to be able to say what you should or shouldn't do with your life.
Yeah. Well, and whether it's right or wrong, moral or immoral, whether we're matched well with our partner or mismatched with our partner, you talked about some workarounds, and I guess I'm curious if there's any malleability along these lines. I mean, certainly if we have a lot of shame and doubt around our sexuality or around our appearance or our ability to attract a mate or these kinds of things, that can certainly be looked at or therapized in these different ways. But what if this is something about yourself that you're interested in maybe expanding or changing your horizons a little bit? Is there any variability there?
Well, I think, first of all, every couple on the planet is mismatched.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's important to say.
Good point. Right.
Yeah. So every couple, or every throuple could be
every relationship is going to involve people that aren't walking at the exact same speed, at the exact same direction.
right. So there's going to be workarounds, no matter what. It's just a matter of how much do you want to work around each other.
Mm-hmm.
And there comes a time when you have to say, is what's more important, maintaining this relationship? For example, I'm dealing with, at any given day, practically, I'm dealing with people who one partner is highly shame oriented and Christian, and the other partner has said, I'm now an atheist and I want to explore my sexuality. Wow, that's going to be a tough nut to crack.
Mm-hmm.
There's the workarounds there are going to be very difficult. Even if sex wasn't it, let's say they're perfectly compatible and they want to stay exclusive forever. But now I'm an atheist and my partner's not, and I want to teach my kids a more open worldview. That's the workarounds there are going to be tough, if not impossible, because the religious worldview locks people in and locks people down.
Mm.
And I don't know how. It's almost always a challenge for people in that situation, a huge challenge, sometimes impossible challenge. But it's not going to go away if you get divorced. I mean, if you got kids, for example, and I want to teach my kids an open view of sexuality. I want to teach my kids an open view of religiosity. The parent that's religious is going to try and restrict that and stop that and interfere with that. Mm-hmm. So even getting divorced isn't going to solve the problem. And I think that's where I tend to come down with a couple and say, you can choose to get divorced. It's the kids that'll suffer from that. You can choose to stay together and learn some workarounds, and the kids will probably benefit from it. Ultimately, it probably means the religious person's going to have to let go of some of their religious restrictive ideas about sex and sexuality, and that's a bridge too far for many. Religions that say you should never ever get divorced are perfectly happy for you to get divorced, mm-hmm. if it means dealing with the religious, changing the religious viewpoint of the children, because mm-hmm. that's what the religion survives on brainwashing the next generation. And the threat to that is more important than their values around marriage and divorce. Far more important. You see that in Jehovah's Witnesses. You see it in Mormons. You see it in Catholics. Yeah, get divorced if it means the kids aren't going to get brainwashed into our particular religion.
Mm-hmm. Fair to say.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your workaround question, but...
Well, I think it just continues to highlight that we're talking about one very specific part of people's lives. And as we go into a relationship, we are looking for compatibility on all of these different issues. So it's an important thing to hold in mind.
Yeah, there's another piece of that holding in mind, and that is that as you go through life, the life cycle changes things. Mm-hmm. So the older you get, I mean, if you are young with no children and not married, there's certain things that you can do. You get married, there's certain things you can no longer do, or you can't do them as much. Mm-hmm. You get kids, that changes again. When the kids get old enough to leave the house, things change again. And what the monogamous model, and I mean the Christian monogamous, not monogamous, but the Christian, it makes no allowances for those changes. Mm-hmm. And we have this notion, and I hate this notion of, he's in a life crisis, or she's going through a life crisis. And what's a 7-year itch, or, mm-hmm. that kind of bullshit. No, you're not. That's normal. It is not. There's nothing wrong with turning 40 and saying, wow, over half my life's gone. What am I going to do with the rest of it? And do I want to go out and express myself in a different way than I did the first 40 years of my life? We denigrate people growing. We denigrate people expressing themselves in new and creative ways when they turn 40 or when they turn 35 or, whatever it is. I'm not, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting model because you're right. Why should any of us be locked into a lifestyle that we chose when we were young idiots? I mean, I'm only 32 and I look at the decisions of my 22-year-old self and I was already married and locked into a number of things that I knew absolutely nothing about.
Yeah. Oh, I was married at 20 and both my first wife and I agreed that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
Man, I feel like I dodged that bullet.
Yeah, congratulations.
So many people I know now are like, oh, yeah, I was married at 22 for a couple of years, and it was a mistake. I was like, oh.
Well, I think
it would have been me. It would have been me if certain things hadn't happened. But, I'm so happy I dodged that bullet.
Well, this may be something of a stretch, but I think it really does tie into what Darrel is saying about the way religion is built to prey on the young, to lock them in at a young age, and then to just sort of keep the momentum going. I have to say, your first book, The God Virus, was the first time it had really struck me how significant proselytizing towards children or indoctrinating people at a young age and making sure that everything was passed along, like religion was passed along genetic lines, how important that was in its maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely essential. I mean, what religion survives that can't indoctrinate the children?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, they don't survive. They can't indoctrinate the children. It's really difficult. Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientologists, run around knocking on people's doors and testing them in front of Walmart and stuff like that, because they're fairly new religions and they have to make sure that the next generation's indoctrinated. But the fact is, it doesn't work very well. I mean, there aren't very many people that convert to Jehovah's Witnesses. But I'm sorry. What it does do is it means it sinks people into a behavior pattern that keeps them involved. That's what the knocking on the doors rarely works, but it really gets the people doing the knocking to stay in the religion and to indoctrinate their children.
Yeah, I apologize. I think I was going to interrupt you to say your exact point. It's not about the doors that they're knocking on. It's the person who's knocking that is becoming, more deeply entrenched in these worldviews and beliefs. So, an important thing to hold on to. So, if we can, I'd like to make sure and jump onto a piece of audio that we have. Next week, we're going to be hopefully having all of our tech issues sorted out. And we're going to be joined here in studio again by Andy from Forbidden Fruit.
Yay!
Who joined us just about a year ago and brought some really interesting tricks. So I'd encourage anybody who's curious to look up that episode. And we've got it listed in the footnotes for this one. But if we can, I want to go ahead and play that audio.
Hey y'all, Andy with Forbidden Fruit here. I just wanted to call to let y'all know how excited I am to return. I'll be back on the show a week after tomorrow to discuss my personal favorite topic of rope, bondage, and all things naughty. I'll be here to talk about the do's and don'ts when it comes to ropes and cuffs, help discuss what to buy and get started, and even plug some good resources to begin learning on your own. If you're curious, stop on by, leave a message, send an email, or call in. I'm looking forward to helping and chatting with all you guys. Okay, enjoy the show. Bye-bye.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're going to be diving into, I guess, all things kink, Andy in particular, going into ropes, and we're going to be talking about bondage as well as, every other form of domination. So
every other form.
We're going to get into it.
It's going to be a long episode.
Go to Pornhub, find your categories. We're going to try to hit as many as we can. But if you have questions, if you've been curious about getting into rope play, about getting into bondage of any sort, we'd love to hear from you. Please keep the emails coming. Join us on the Ask line. Hit us up at 512-666-0275. That's 666-0-ASK. And we'd love to hear your questions as we're kind of exploring that side of things. I appreciate everybody who's bared with us tonight, and we'll look forward to talking to you all then. Darrel, thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, I would like to. Could I make one plug?
Yeah,
Yes, please do.
I just want to alert people to the concept of religious trauma and our conference that's coming up in Vancouver in April. Not that everybody's going to go there, but the notion is really important. We can talk about that another time maybe. And I'm actually speaking on religious trauma syndrome and its roots next Sunday at Oasis, and that will be live streamed actually on Facebook. So if anybody's interested in that kind of thing, and of course, my books, The Sex and God and The God Virus. Hope people take a look at that, especially chapter 20 on sex and God, because that was what this whole conversation today was about.
Yeah, and I've already got links up to Sex and God in the footnotes for the episode. I'll make sure to include some information about the conference and the live stream coming up. It all sounds like great material.
Yeah, and also be sure to check out recoveringfromreligion.org and the Secular Therapy Project and the hotline that you can call if you've got questions about deconverting or the deconversion process. Those are all thanks to Darrel as well.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, thank
you so much.
And thank you all for joining us tonight. I guess it's about that time to encourage everybody to go out and give themselves a big old orgasm. Or better
Give
yet,
somebody else one.
Crew cam.
Thank you.
Fuck it. We'll do it live.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.